This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Dozens killed after oxygen tanks explode at a hospital treating COVID-19 patients in Iraq. Rebels in northern Chad offered to discuss a ceasefire and political settlement. And Egypt eases some COVID restrictions to allow musical events during the holy month of Ramadan. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. We examine the likely impact of the resumption of direct flights between Egypt and Russia. And scientists in Uganda decry the practice of self-medication in treating malaria, linking it with drug resistance. We begin the hour in Baghdad, where dozens of people were killed in a hospital fire and many others were injured. Some reports put the number of those killed to be as high as 58. Iraq's Civil Defense Unit says a fire broke out when several oxygen tanks exploded late on Saturday night. Civil defense teams, firefighters, and healthcare workers rushed to the scene. The fire was put out, and around 90 patients, along with healthcare workers, were rescued. The hospital's intensive care unit provides treatment for patients suffering with severe COVID-19 symptoms. Many patients were affected by the lack of oxygen during their evacuation. Others suffered from smoke inhalation. Let's move on to India, where an Indian Air Force aircraft carrying oxygen tankers from Singapore has landed in the country's eastern Panagar airbase. This comes as India attempts to battle a spike of COVID-19 cases. Media reports say the tankers would be sent to different hospitals across the country. Overwhelmed hospitals in India are running out of oxygen supplies. The country's coronavirus infections have soared in what the country's high court called a tsunami, setting a world record for cases for a third consecutive day. The number of cases across the country rose by almost 350,000 in a single day on Sunday. New Delhi is extending a lockdown by another week. Ravinda Bauer reports.
It's a field of funeral pyres of those who have lost their battle against coronavirus. It's a mass cremation. No rituals, no emotional last goodbyes. As bodies pile up outside crematoriums in Delhi, makeshift arrangements are being made to accommodate more funerals.
They filled in, then this used to be a parking space, and we broke the wall and make space for 24 pyres, and slowly it became 50. There are so many bodies coming, we are running out of wood. We bring 300 quintals of wood, and that is used very quickly, and then we bring another 300 quintals, and that is used too. The situation is very bad. If this continues, then in 4 or 5 days we will have to cremate bodies on the road. There is no other option.
In many hospitals, there are bodies lying unclaimed. Some families have refused to perform the last rite of a COVID-positive patient. In such cases, volunteers step in to help with funeral ceremonies.
When the families do not accept the bodies of COVID-19 patients, the hospitals hand over the bodies to us after completing a small formality. When the bodies come to us, we inquire about his religion. And if the patient is a Hindu, we perform the funeral as per Hindu customs. And if the patient is a Muslim, we do the funeral accordingly.
Even the graveyards are running out of space, and the grave diggers are working overtime.
Even if it is night, we will try to finish the last burial for the day, because no mortuaries will keep the body. So that is the reason we want to finish all the burials and then go home.
Looking at the number of bodies that are brought for funerals daily, some of the crematorium workers say that maybe India is undercounting the fatalities. Ravinder Bava, CGTN, Delhi.
Let's revisit our top story for the hour of that fire that happened at a Baghdad hospital. As we'd mentioned earlier, the ICU of that hospital treated COVID-19 patients. The outbreak of such a fire was not an isolated case. On Friday, just 2 days ago, 14 coronavirus patients were killed when a fire broke out at a hospital in Western India. Just days before that, 20 COVID-19 patients lost their lives at another hospital in India following an oxygen leak there. To discuss this further, we're now joined by Dr. Aslam Dasu, a co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. As we've mentioned, deadly fires have now been reported in hospitals treating COVID-19 patients in India and in Iraq, all linked with oxygen supplies or storage. Doctor, what safety measures have to be in place in medical facilities handling oxygen tanks to prevent such incidents?
Good afternoon. Well, I think these are tragic events, and I think the COVID-19 pandemic has created exigencies which were probably not foreseen in a number of these institutions. Most hospitals, in fact, all of them of capacity, will have oxygen reticulation with measures in place to mitigate any danger emerging from, sparks hitting this highly flammable gas. And generally, when in normal times, hospital use of oxygen is pretty well regulated. I believe in these moments, especially in crises areas such as in India, where oxygen supply has to be increased dramatically, the existing reticulation is often added onto, by new pipes, new machines, new cylinders, etc. And it's likely that the problem actually lay there, that where the installation may well have been faulty. But again, it's important to understand that the increased use of oxygen in these facilities during especially surges of COVID, where oxygen is the mainstay of treatment, the risk of an outbreak is much higher.
Doctor, speak to us about when accidents do occur and fires break out, what can be done to minimize the impact of those fires in hospitals?
Okay, so I think the first thing that all authorities have to do in hospitals is revisit and review their current fire regulations. In hospitals in particular, because of the immobility of patients, the evacuation of patients, for example, when there is a fire, is a difficult affair at the best of times. For obvious reasons, patients are immobile, they're on monitors, drips, etc., and it's difficult to manage them. I think the additional capacity for oxygen reticulation is firstly an area that must be properly managed. It must be done through, certified oxygen reticulation engineers. For example, in South Africa, a couple of months ago, there was a problem in a COVID ward where oxygen was being used. And there was a problem in terms of the reticulation pressures were dropping. They brought a team in that had absolutely no idea about hospital use of oxygen, and they simply turned off the oxygen supply, resulting in the deaths of some patients before they could, before the staff figured out what was going on. So these kinds of things are going to be breakthrough events. What has to happen is urgent, detailed review of fire management in the context of increased oxygen use. And I think every hospital will have regulations, and I think it behoves the authorities to revisit those urgently, especially now.
Doctor, here on the continent, there are reports of added pressure on the healthcare sector due to COVID-19. But how can we also be perhaps more vigilant in preventing outbreaks of fires in medical facilities handling oxygen supplies?
Well, again, I think the people managing the process of increasing reticulation, bringing in tanks, etc., have to be qualified to do that. We might take it for granted that oxygen is just a gas. You stick a tank in and presto, you've got oxygen supply. It's not as simple as that. So qualified reticulation engineers have to be used. That's the first thing. Second, authorities have to be aware that a fire may break out at any given moment. It may not be in the reticulation system. It may be at the outflow areas, in wards, where a high oxygen content in the atmosphere will be amenable to a spark lighting things up, when in ordinary circumstances it wouldn't. So again, fire marshals, fire monitors, and proper regulatory approaches would be your best bet in minimizing these events. Now, it's difficult at times, and one understands when there's a pressure and a huge influx of patients and you just don't have time to do things. Mistakes are made. And unfortunately, we have the kind of accidents we have had. But, you know, there's really no getting around the fact that increased diligence, due diligence on oxygen reticulation, oxygen management has to become a mainstay. And this is not going to be only for now. We are going to have further waves and resurgences all over the place. So there's really no excuse for not reviewing the urgent fire management regulations in all facilities right now.
Dr. Dessou, thank you so much for that valuable information. Dr. Aslam Dessou, he's a co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum in Johannesburg, South Africa. Let's move on to Tunisia now, where officials there say hospitals have run out of ICU beds as coronavirus cases in that country spike. The North African state has recorded around 10,000 deaths since the start of the pandemic. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi gives us the details.
Tunisia's health ministry has been working to provide more ICU beds and reduce the pressure on public hospitals.
The health department is under pressure to provide ICU beds. We've reached the limit in public hospitals. We've used the equipment gradually, but the surge in infection cases is unprecedented. We've requested help from private clinics.
The Prime Minister criticized the lack of support provided by the private sector to the COVID-19 task force. Moreover, the government is considering requisitioning private hospital beds.
ICU beds are not available. We're looking for urgent solutions. The problem of lack of means is critical. The government will not hesitate to take new measures to provide ICU beds.
Health authorities have warned of the spread of the more contagious UK variant in the country.
The UK variant of the coronavirus is deadly in Tunisia. Its spread has caused the sudden need in ICU beds and ventilators. Hospitals are under pressure.
According to the National Observatory of New and Emerging Diseases, 92% of ICU beds and 85% of oxygen-supported beds in the public hospitals are currently occupied by COVID-19 patients.
The Scientific Committee on Coronavirus has warned that the health system in Tunisia is collapsing in the face of an unprecedented surge in the number of infections. The health department will increase to more than 360 the number of ICU beds. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, countries have been rolling out new policies in response to surges in coronavirus infections. A nighttime curfew began in Germany today. Meanwhile, the Spanish government has sent Johnson & Johnson vaccines to health centers nationwide. Reporting from Madrid, here's Rahul Pathak.
In Germany, Health Minister Jens Spahn set out his vaccination plan for the next 2 months. On Friday, his country enforced emergency brake measures designed to lower the rising infection rate. The law that was passed earlier in the week by the Bundestag means people have to remain in their homes from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m, with walkers and joggers allowed out only until midnight. It's hoped that these measures, plus a ramping up of the vaccination program, will bring positive results by the summer.
According to the delivery forecasts that we currently have, we will be able to lift the prioritization in June, but that does not mean that we will be able to vaccinate everyone by June. Of course, we'll have to continue throughout the summer.
In Spain, doses of the Janssen vaccine have been sent out to health centres nationwide. The shipment of 146,000 doses of the single-shot drug had been held in storage for the past week, whilst medicines regulators studied research into concerns over blood clots.
We are starting vaccination with Janssen for immobilised patients who are highly dependent. What advantage is this vaccine giving us? It is a single-dose vaccine and therefore we are going to speed up the vaccination process.
Well, Spain has now passed the 10 million mark when it comes to people having at least one vaccination dose, and it's about to reach the 4 million mark when it comes to people fully immunised. And in recent days, it administered a record 400,000 jabs in one day, signs that Spain's vaccination programme is gathering pace. In France, Disneyland Paris will open its doors once again, but this time as a mass vaccination centre. The famous tourist attraction has been shut since October the 30th as non-essential businesses were forced to close. It's hoped that around 1,000 people per day will be vaccinated. The country wants to reach 20 million vaccinations of at least one dose by the middle of next month. Finally, good news for the elderly in Bosnia. Citizens over 75 can now start receiving vaccinations against COVID-19. The country registered over 8,000 COVID-related deaths in a population of just 3.5 million, the third highest death rate per capita in the world. The opening of the country's first mass vaccination centre in Sarajevo this week has helped accelerate the programme. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, let's now take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including rebels in northern Chad offer to discuss a ceasefire and political settlement. And we update you on a souring bilateral ties between Washington and Ankara after the U.S. recognizes the Armenian genocide.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Ntah, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Let's go to Chad, where rebels from the Front for Change and Concord say they are ready to observe a ceasefire and discuss a political settlement. The announcement by rebel spokesperson Kingabe Oguzemi de Tapo comes just 6 days after the death of President Idris Deby. The FACT rebel group came into Chad over the northern border from Libya on April the 11th. They were calling for an end to the 30-year rule of President Deby. Following the president's death on Monday, the Air Force has since bombarded rebel positions in the north. Opposition politicians and civil society have called for peaceful protests and a national dialogue with the Transitional Military Council to end the violence. The African Union has called on Somali stakeholders to return to the negotiating table and come up with a plan to hold elections in the country. The AU Peace and Security Council condemned the decision of Somalia's parliament to extend the mandate of President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Here's CGTN's Guram Chala with that story.
The Peace and Security Council of the African Union has asked all Somali political leaders to prioritize the country's national interests and to immediately resume election dialogue. The AU said this dialogue must be held in search of mutually agreed upon solutions to outstanding issues that impede the staging of elections in the country. The African Union Security Council has also seriously condemned the decisions of the Somali House of the People, which extended the mandate of President Abdullahi Farmajo by 2 years. The AU is worried this could undermine the unity and stability of the country, as well as the democratic and constitutional processes. More importantly, the African Union believes the current political situation of Somalia has the potential to threaten its relative peace and security, as well as the important gains that Somalia has made over the years. The AU has now formally communicated all Somali sides, and a special envoy has also been assigned by the Union to the country to help facilitate the resumption of dialogue in Somalia. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell Fontelles, has held talks with Mali's top leaders in Bamako. Fontelles has pledged the European Union's support as Mali undergoes a transition to an elected government following last year's military coup. Fontelles says Mali's transition should be based on elections, structural reforms, and good governance. Mali's presidential and legislative elections are scheduled to take place in February of 2022.
Finally, I had the pleasure to see the president before the transition, to bring him the clear support of the EU to this civil transition. It's a transition that should be historical. It will serve as a basis to the new Mali, with a process and a calendar that should be followed, with elections, structural reforms and good governance. With this, Mali can count on the support of the European Union.
ASEAN leaders have reached a 5-point consensus on resolving the crisis in Myanmar. The agreement was made Saturday during a summit of ASEAN leaders in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. The consensus calls for the immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar. It also promises constructive dialogue among all parties concerned. It calls for a special ASEAN envoy to facilitate the dialogue and for the envoy to visit Myanmar. It also assures the acceptance of aid. Myanmar's military leader, General Min Aung Hlaing, attended the summit. That was his first overseas trip since the military took over in February. Zakina Ahoelia has the details.
Several leaders from the ASEAN region attended a meeting in Jakarta to mainly discuss the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. The country's military took over back in February, overthrowing Myanmar's elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi.
ASEAN leaders have come to the consensus where we hope that Myanmar could return back to democracy. We would like to see Senior General Min Aung Hlaing stop violence against citizens in Myanmar, release political prisoners, and send humanitarian aid where it is needed.
If the issue continues to spiral out of control, it will become a regional concern, as instability in one country could threaten to destabilize ASEAN as a whole. As a group, ASEAN has a principle of non-interference, but experts say in this case, it's important to abandon that rule.
We do not want the ASEAN region, which has enjoyed relative peace and stability, for the past 4 decades, to be torn apart. We do not want ASEAN region to suffer like what has happened in the Middle East, with so many conflicts there, like in Syria, like in Libya. So ASEAN is very concerned that the situation in Myanmar does not escalate further.
The leaders also discussed future advancements in the region concerning community handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as economic recovery efforts. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
The United States has formally recognized the early 20th century deaths of Armenians as genocide. The recognition has long been sought by Armenia and resisted by Turkey, a key U.S. ally. The U.S. move is expected to put additional strain on the frayed relationship between the two NATO countries. CGTN's Toby Muse reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden declared a massacre of Armenians by the Ottoman Empire over a century ago a genocide, potentially complicating relations with NATO ally Turkey. On Saturday, the White House issued a statement on Armenian Remembrance Day, in which Joe Biden used the word genocide, a word U.S. presidents have traditionally stopped short of using in the past. The American people honor all those Armenians who perished in the genocide that began 106 years ago today. The statement was welcomed by Armenians who have been pushing for decades for the U.S. to recognize the bloodshed as a genocide.
This means an end to the long history of denialism. This means that the U.S. is being on the side of the justice of human rights, and that this means to me in person that justice will prevail and humanity will prevail.
The declaration was rejected by Turkey, the foreign minister tweeting, "Words cannot change or rewrite history. We have nothing to learn from anybody on our own past." Some people in Istanbul expressed their dismay at Biden's pronouncement.
It's a bad move. Our relationship is already really bad with the US, and this will only worsen it. Not to mention, there's no such thing as an Armenian genocide.
Previous presidents have tread carefully on this issue to avoid annoying Turkey, a country that emerged out of the Ottoman Empire. Former US President Ronald Reagan once referred to the massacres as a genocide while commemorating the victims of the Nazi Holocaust. It's estimated that up to 1.5 million Armenians were killed or deported in the bloodshed unleashed by the Ottoman Empire. Turkey says the figure was much less and that the killings were part of World War I, with victims on both sides. Relations between Turkey and the US have been chilly in recent months, with differences over Syria and Russia. It wasn't until Friday that the two presidents shared their first phone call with Biden as president. The White House said that Biden in this call made it clear his desire for a constructive bilateral relationship with Turkey. Local media reports here say that Biden also let his Turkish counterpart know that he would be recognizing the violence as genocide. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Washington, D.C.
Ankara continues to refrain from calling the incident a genocide, but they do say many Armenians died during the First World War. This has been the policy of every government of the Republic of Turkey. They attribute many of the deaths to intercommunal violence during the reign of Turkey's Ottoman Empire. They add that the toll worsened due to circumstances including famine and disease. The Turkish Foreign Ministry says the population of Armenians at the time and the death toll were significantly lower than what's been claimed. Historians, though, and scholars have said some 1.5 million Armenians died during that period. Well, let's revisit our top story from the Iraqi capital, where dozens of people were killed in a hospital fire. Latest reports say the number of those killed has now reached 82, and more than 100 have been injured. Iraq's Civil Defense Unit says the fire broke out when several oxygen tanks exploded late on Saturday night. Civil defense teams, firefighters, and healthcare workers rushed to the scene. The fire was put out, and around 90 patients, along with healthcare workers, were rescued. The hospital's intensive care unit provides treatment for patients suffering with severe COVID-19 symptoms. Well, back here on the continent, Ugandan scientists are concerned about increasing cases of malaria drug resistance. They say the malaria parasite is becoming more resistant to treatment because of self-medication by some patients. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
Amina Bazarama can now smile with her son. Her son has been discharged from the hospital after battling bouts of malaria for a week.
Malaria plus.
We've been struggling with malaria for a long time. Before we were admitted, we had visited several other hospitals, and the findings indicated that my child had high malaria and bacteria infection, but he was not getting better.
Health workers say drug resistance in malaria treatment is now common.
In about 30% of the patients we get, they come in with resistance already due to the numerous and various types they have used before coming to hospitals.
A similar concern has also been highlighted in a recent Lancet report which showed that drug-resistant malaria is gaining a foothold in Africa. Ugandan health workers are now discouraging patients from self-medicating so as to reduce incidences of drug resistance.
Self-medication is the biggest complicator of all treatments that we give. So we strongly advise patients or people when they have signs and symptoms of malaria that at least they can come and have a test done.
Figures from Uganda's health ministry show that the country registers 25,000 cases of malaria per day. Doctors here say they treat 20 patients daily suffering from malaria. They are now encouraging the locals to use preventive measures like mosquito nets. The government is now promoting outdoor residue spraying and distribution of treated bed nets to keep the disease at bay.
Mosquito themselves, there are still plenty. So we are calling upon the people, let's try and work on the water lodges, your environment. If there are bushes, clear the bushes. If there are water lodges in the compound, make sure there are no water the water drainages are clear. If at all your house has got windows, and in the evening you close the windows so that mosquitoes not enter into the house, and you sleep under the mosquito net.
Through a campaign dubbed Under the Net, the government has so far distributed over 27 million treated bed nets. Health workers are now hoping that this and many other initiatives will help Uganda become malaria-free. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Tunisia is working to reduce health disparities between social groups and regions under a new government strategy. The 2030 National Health Policy also aims to rehabilitate the health sector. CGTN's Adnan Shiwashi reports.
Hisham Mishishi emphasized that the public sector must provide access to health care for everyone. Tunisia's public health sector currently covers 80% of health services.
The new national health policy offers funding to provide social security coverage to all social classes without discrimination, especially vulnerable people. The access to health services is a right, while healthcare fees are increasing year after year.
The Prime Minister stressed the government's commitment to adopt a hands-on approach in reducing health disparities.
Unfortunately, the management of the healthcare system has always been made on a day-to-day basis without a long-term strategic vision for this vital sector. The 2030 National Health Policy puts citizens at the core of the healthcare system, not only as actors but also as partners. The needs of the citizens and health professions must be met by the state.
The Health Department announced that the government is seeking to dedicate a new budget for more paramedics. The project will increase the number of the medical staff in hospitals as part of the fight against COVID-19.
Tunisian citizens and health professionals are fed up with empty promises made by the government. Reducing health disparities will never happen without a concrete roadmap. We're fighting a deadly virus throughout the country. We need the tools to win this war.
The Tunisia government has cut the price of the coronavirus laboratory test by 20%. This reduction aims to facilitate access to testing throughout the country.
Tunisia has always prioritized the development of its healthcare system and has introduced basic services to a large share of its population. The public sector is currently pressing reforms to improve the quality of its services. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
But here is a quick reminder of our top stories. In Iraq's capital, Baghdad, dozens of people were killed in a hospital fire and many others were injured. Latest reports put the number of those killed to be at least 82. Iraq's civil defense unit says a fire broke out when several oxygen tanks exploded late on Saturday night. An Indian Air Force aircraft carrying oxygen tankers from Singapore has landed in the country's eastern Panagar Air Base. Overwhelmed hospitals in India are running out of oxygen supplies. The country set a world record for new COVID-19 cases for a third consecutive day. The number of cases rose by almost 350,000 in a single day on Sunday. And in Chad, rebels from the Front for Change and Concord say they are ready to observe a ceasefire and discuss a political settlement. The announcement by rebel spokesperson Detapo comes just 6 days after the death of President Idris Deby. The Air Force has since bombarded rebel positions in the north. And those were the stories making headlines this hour. Let's now take a short break and return your business news, including we examine the likely impact of the resumption of direct flights between Egypt and Russia.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's now delve into the world of business. Direct chartered and scheduled flights between Egypt and Russia are set to resume. The announcement came after a phone call between the Egyptian and Russian presidents. Yasser Kim fills us in on the importance of such a decision for Egypt.
It's the news most in the aviation and tourism industry have been eagerly waiting for. Russia, Egypt's largest market, is finally returning Egypt's Minister of Civil Aviation says flights could resume as early as the first week of May. Flights were suspended back in 2015 after a Russian passenger jet was downed over Sharm el-Sheikh, killing all on board. Since then, only Cairo resumed flights to Russia until the coronavirus pandemic put a stop to that as well.
The Russians were representing more or less 30% of the Egyptian tourism. So 30% from the total arrival were actually coming from Russia. So, and this represents as well like a big part of the spending habit of the Russian, mainly on the Red Sea destination. When the incident took place, it has affected Egypt dramatically. And not only the Russian market, it had an impact across all the incoming tourism in Egypt.
Tourism is a major source of hard currency for the North African government. It also accounts for about 9% of GDP. Therefore, the government embarked on an aggressive 5-year plan to upgrade its security measures in airports, resorts, and all tourist sites, while Russia had been continuously sending security delegations to monitor this overhaul. And the decision to allow Russian visitors back couldn't have come at a better time, with the damaging effects of the coronavirus widely felt.
The fact that we're just opening or reopening a market that used to feed us with the most number of tourists is a very positive news for us. It is expected that the number of Russians will start increasing, especially that most of the European countries are still, their borders are closed in front of the Russian market. So we expect that in this Q3 and Q4 of 2021, that we see like a high flow of the Russian market into Egypt, and it's the time that we become ready from a service perspective and a product perspective in order to meet their needs and sophisticated requirements.
9 airports have been given the green light to receive the Russian visitors. However, the first flights are expected to touch down at the popular Red Sea resort cities of Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada. Russia used to send 3 million tourists to Egypt every year before the flight ban. To put this into perspective, in 2020, the total number of tourists to Egypt from all nationalities was 3 million. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Nigeria's inflation has reached its highest in 4 years. Figures from the country's Bureau of Statistics shows that the cost of living rose by 0.8 points in March to hit just over 18%. CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam now reports on how the inflationary pressures are impacting the economy.
Chukwemeka Ibe trades in household staples in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. His store used to be a hive of activities, but not anymore. Rising food prices continue to affect the purchasing power of his customers.
The reason of increments is because of everything. Like now, fuel is scarce, and some motors, some trailers where they bring goods for us, some they are complaining about if they buy fuel, the charges and all those things. Dollar add money too. You cannot live without food. People are coming to buy, but number one, everything add money, but people are complaining about saying everything everything add price.
Inflation rate in March surged to 18.17% from 17.33% recorded the previous month. It's the highest since January 2017, when it rose to 18.72%.
Initially, like 6 months ago, I can spend like 30,000-50,000, and in 1 month I will be so comfortable and even I will even have a lot of carries over to the next month. But nonetheless, with 60,000, 70,000, it can't even get up to 1 month.
Nigeria's dependence on imports is a major driver of inflation, which shows no signs of easing.
It's a function of the low level of productivity that we're witnessing in the economy, low and high level of importation. We're practically importing everything that we consume, so there's always pressure on the naira, which we're finding it difficult to generate in terms of substance. When you have a monocultural economy, you are susceptible to all the vulnerabilities, including unpredictable income.
Experts recommend the government follows a homegrown approach to economic recovery by ramping up local production and intensifying diversification efforts.
When you have these kind of discrepancies, it's an intangible that has a way of rubbing off on the productive sector, particularly the human elements, because it becomes very difficult for you to galvanize people to invest their hope on that kind of system in terms of investment. And when you cannot galvanize your people to invest locally, to what extent can you then encourage people, outsiders, to come and invest?
Until then, Nigerians who already spend more than half of their earnings on food will have to cope with even higher cost of living. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, it's been nearly a week since a devastating fire swept through parts of South Africa's Table Mountain. South Africa's Environment Minister Barbara Creecy has praised the 1,000 firefighters who battled the blaze. She said the fact that only 4 of them were injured and that there wasn't a single loss of life was a testimony to their firefighting skills and training. Renee Delcam reports.
The runaway fire broke out in scorching hot, dry conditions, and authorities suspect it may have been started accidentally by a homeless person in the Table Mountain National Park. The Minister of Environmental Affairs flew over the 650 to 700 hectares of land destroyed in the blaze to get an idea of the scale and impact of the event.
When you are up there and you see the damage, it's very tragic. The surface of the mountain looks like the surface of the moon. It's very, very tragic.
Besides the firefighters on the ground, government helicopters spent around 60 hours in the sky, dropping over 400 tons of water on the flames. And the minister said her department would have to put mechanisms in place to adapt to the effects of climate change in order to mitigate the risk of wildfires in future.
What I think we all have to understand is that we are all operating in the context of climate change, and climate change makes the likelihood of wildfires more possible. And that obviously means that in due course we will have to think about protected trees on the mountain. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? But those are questions for the future.
The minister paid tribute to the bravery, dedication and discipline of the firefighters who had worked around the clock to extinguish the blaze. She said even though the Table Mountain National Park fire had been really big and very bad, one got the sense that it could have been a whole lot worse.
For me, the only way that I will describe this fire, I will just say for the past week, it was a war without guns, where everyone at the end of the day remained safe.
There's a very clear line where the fire was stopped by our firefighters, and you realize the incredible work that they did to prevent this fire from spreading across the whole mountain. We are indebted as a society, as a city, as South Africans to these firefighters and their bravery, and we salute them.
2 independent investigations, one by South African National Parks and another by the University of Cape Town, are underway to determine the causes and liabilities of the fire. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Egypt is slowly easing COVID restrictions for musical events, allowing an annual Ramadan musical festival to be back on the scene. It brings troops from various countries to perform religious music and chants in a spiritual setting for the holy month. Yasser Hakim reports.
Recital music lovers are again enjoying the Spiritual Music Nights festival after a year's absence because of the coronavirus.
The festival is an annual event that takes place every year in a different location or city. This time in the neighborhood of Sayyida Zainab, a part of Old Cairo, a popular destination for Egyptians to spend the Ramadan nights. And the music blends with history inside Al Sineri, a 300-year-old house renovated to become a renowned cultural center. Egyptian group Message of International Peace performed a unique mix of religious chanting that has inspired the guests.
What attracted my attention very much was the mix of religious Islamic and Coptic chantings. It was a beautiful musical and spiritual merge that I haven't seen before.
The founder of this event reflects on the symbols behind these songs.
Our message is to consolidate the essence of religion, which is love, tolerance, and peace. These songs have been widely popular here and affected many listeners with their meanings. We want to reach out to the world with these three principles.
The Spiritual Music Nights Festival is hosting groups from Sudan, Palestine, and Syria, but Indonesia was the guest on the opening day.
It's fun and important to know about other countries and open up to different music and cultures. I enjoyed it.
The traditional Tanura dance has also been the highlight of the night. The festival had to do with the limited attendance this edition to adhere with COVID-19 regulations, hoping next year it will be back to normal. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Some sport action after the break. Here's what's also coming up. We look into how efforts to have the now collapsed European Super League can impact Africa football.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now for the latest from the world of sport. The football world was filled with anger this week as the controversial European Super League plans were announced. But after strong opposition from fans all over the world, the project was stopped in its tracks. Here's CGTN's CS Duplessis with more on what these developments could mean for Africa's Super League ambitions.
The scuppered plans for the controversial European Super League have led to the owners of the clubs involved apologising to their frantic fans. And this debacle should in theory sound a warning to the CAF hierarchy, who have proposed a similar idea for a continental Super League to perhaps rethink their strategy.
It just sort of depends on sort of what concept that they are thinking to bring about. But they would have learned their lessons from, if ever they had any ideas of going a similar route, they would have learned their lessons. And I think the uproar on this continent would be much more devastating than what we've seen over the last couple of days in Europe.
Former Fulham and South Africa national team goalkeeper Andre Arendse says the failed plans are a blessing in disguise, especially for the African players playing in the top clubs in Europe and England.
It should be an eye-opener. It should be a lesson of some sort. And I do know that there was the threat of players being banned from their national teams if they were to play for their clubs in the Super League. That would be absolutely disastrous for the African game. When you look at the quality that Africa has in European football, for example, it is always important for those players plying their trade at those big clubs to bring it back to their African countries.
The burning question for many African football fans remain why the current problems, like a proper television broadcast deal and the fact that the continent doesn't have more places at the World Cup, have not been addressed by CAF's new leadership.
No wonder Infantino takes time out of his busy schedule to come to Africa over the last 2 elections to try and have an influence, because he knows the power Africa holds, but yet we still have 5 sports. I think they should be working more to lobby that than to focus on more sort of money grabbing methods. Although the continent does need to make have more advertising revenue, make more money from the game, but not obviously at the expense of the players and the football community at large.
We've got to look at the priorities and we've got to put those priorities in order of importance. For me right now, I'm a massive advocate for development on home soil and in the African game. That has to be one of the top priorities for CAF right now: develop the game, put in structures, whether we need to build elite centers around Africa to house your top talented players, for example. The scouting processes have got to be improved right through the continent. That is top priority.
The failed attempt to establish the European Super League should be seen as a lesson for African football, and one that the new CAF president should heed as he plots a new course for the game on the continent. His priorities are clear, and at this point, establishing an African Super League should not be one of them. CS2+C, CGTN.